Welcome to Portland. Yay. It's really exciting to be back here. This is the fourth time ESA has met here. The first time was in 2004. It's especially exciting to be able to gather such a large group of people. We're already at over 4,000 for this week, and then there are also some virtual attendees as well. So we're really excited about this week's meeting. As we open this meeting, we want to acknowledge and thank the diverse indigenous groups, the peoples whose presence marks this territory where we're all gathering. We have a very special welcome from Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield, so we'd like to take a listen to that now.
Chalawiti, welcome to Oregon. Welcome to the ESA conference. Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield wa amnashi, shitatutene, kalapuya, salets, salagi. I'm Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield. I'm enrolled with the Confederated Tribes of Siletz and would love to welcome you here. We'd like for you to know that this is the ancestral homelands of the Multnomah, Clackamas, Clackamas, Tumwater, Watlala, bands of the Chinook, and the Tualatin and Kalapuya, Malala, as well as other indigenous nations who've made their homes along the Columbia River since time immemorial. The Ecological Society of America would like to express our respect to the native First Peoples of this land, recognizing the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon. Those tribes are the Burns-Paiute tribe, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, Confederated Tribes of Grand Round, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla, Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, Coquille Indian Tribe, Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua, and the Klamath Tribes. Other indigenous nations who have made their homes along the Columbia River may not be recognized, but we respect those as well. We offer gratitude for the stewardship of these lands, past, present, and future. In the spirit of self-reflection, learning, and partnership, the Ecological Society of America renews its commitment to embrace and celebrate Indigenous scholarship and participation in our programs, events, and governance through respectful dialogue and collaboration, particularly with the Traditional Ecological Knowledge section of the ESA, which was established 20 years ago. We are also pleased to work actively with the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, ACES, to elevate Indigenous voices and seek ways to support career development opportunities of Indigenous students and scholars in the ecological sciences. Throughout the week, we encourage you, the ESA, to connect with us, Indigenous scientists, by participating in at least one session or talk organized by the Traditional Ecological Knowledge section or other Indigenous scientists. Further your own learning journey about the ongoing multifaceted relationships between the land, plants, animals, and people, Indigenous to this place, as well as where you come from as well. Enjoy your stay in our beautiful homelands. Auf du.
Yes, we want to thank Dr. Samantha Chisholm Hatfield. That was a wonderful introduction. It is on the app and the meeting platform, so you can view it again at any time. And I just wanted to underscore her invitation to join in the TEK sessions and events. There is a TEK mixer on Tuesday night. I'm sorry, I know it's along with a lot of other mixers that are happening on Tuesday as well, but please try to take advantage of your time here to learn more. I realized I forgot to say who I was. My name's Catherine O'Riordan. I'm the Executive Director of ESA. Very, very happy and very proud to be able to help lead this diverse, exciting organization that's making a big impact in science and resilience and handling the challenges of the future. At this meeting, we are donating over $20,000 to offset our environmental footprint to an organization called the Blueprint Foundation. They are a local group here in Portland that aims to eliminate the opportunity gap, as we say, for Black identified and other youth in the region. They do nature-based learning and culturally responsive workforce development. They have an approach they call WISE, Witness, Investigate, Solutions, Educate, where the participants, they witness nature, they investigate environmental challenge, they contribute to solutions and codify their learning and educate their community. They are here at the meeting, they are in the exhibit hall, so please stop by and learn more about this program. I want to thank our sponsors for the meeting that were acknowledged earlier on the intro slides. You'll see them also throughout the exhibit hall. We have about 50 exhibitors, plus we have many tabletop exhibits from the sections and chapters. They will all be open and available to talk to you throughout the week. We're doing the morning coffee in the exhibit hall as well as the afternoon refreshments. And just after this session, we will retire to the exhibit hall for our opening reception. ESA's president, our president Sharon Colinge, is here tonight, and she will moderate this session. I'll introduce her at greater length tomorrow. We will also have the Regional Policy Award tonight, and then hear from our keynote speaker, Dr. Susie Mosier. I wanted to also just mention before Dr. Colinge comes up that we do want to assure a safe meeting space for all, and to that end, we expect all participants to adhere to the ESA Code of Conduct. You'll see it on poster boards throughout the exhibit hall. They'll be on the pre-session slides. The code itself describes the expected behaviors for all attendees, exhibitors, everyone who's here, and the consequences if you don't abide by our code of conduct. And I would have to say that this has really, I think, we're trying to make an inclusive atmosphere for everyone, so please be respectful of each other. Also, we're not completely out of the pandemic, so we do encourage you to wear a mask indoors, but please respect everyone's choice because we're in a new phase of the pandemic. So that's all I have for today. But welcome again. It's so great to be back here in Portland, and I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Sharon Colinge, our president.
It's great to see you. It's great to be here. I'm Sharon Colinge. I'm president of the Ecological Society of America, and I'm so thrilled to be here in Portland to welcome you all and to enjoy our week together, learning and connecting with each other. Tonight, I'm here to present our 2023 Regional Policy Award. Every year during the annual meeting, ESA recognizes an elected or appointed local policymaker whose record reflects the use of ecological science to inform policy decisions. ESA is honored to present its 16th annual Regional Policy Award to the Director for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation's Department of Natural Resources, Eric Quemps. Eric is an enrolled member of the Yakima Indian Nation and has spent most of his life living on the Umatilla Indian Reservation, with his professional career focused on working on the reservation and in the ceded lands of the CTUIR, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Since 2007, Director Quemps has implemented the first foods management approach for the CTUIR. Previously, he spent 8 years as a wildlife biologist in the CTUIR Department of Natural Resources Wildlife Program and 8 years working for the Umatilla National Forest, where his career included interdisciplinary rotations. This is the first time in the history of the ESA Policy Award that a tribal member and tribal governance employee has been recognized for their work in this context. Our meeting theme, ESA for All Ecologists, encompasses the continuum of ecological knowledges and practices, and Eric Quemps' First Foods approach provides a clear and direct link between natural resource management goals and people. Director Quemps also served on the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board as a member and also as its co-chair. This board is a state agency that provides grants to help Oregonians care for local streams, rivers, wetlands, and natural areas. Together, community members and landowners use a wide range of criteria to jointly determine what needs to be done to conserve and improve rivers and natural habitat in the places where they live. Please join me in congratulating Eric Quemps for the ESA Regional Policy Award.
Good evening, and thank you very much. It's very humbling and exciting to receive the Regional Policy Award from the Ecological Society of America. It was something I didn't anticipate, but it's something I know I will reflect on and use to inspire me to try to do better work and to continue to expand our work on first foods and develop new ecological work that is responsive to the first food serving order and our community. And I also think that it will benefit society at large. The first foods that we work for are native species of the Pacific Northwest, and so we work for both native species and physical and ecological processes that will restore and protect them. I wanted to reflect on a few things about the ESA mission that I think this award tonight is kind of responding to or responsive to, and that is advancing science and the practice of ecology and supporting ecologists, which I very much appreciate. And mentioned in the opening remarks is that I have a degree in wildlife science, but I had a very strong interest in ecology as a young person, and I took all of the ecology coursework I could and a very diverse training in my profession. And so this is something that is very, very near and dear to my heart. A couple other aspects about the ESA goals, the notion of having a vibrant community of ecologists, and I really appreciate that includes indigenous ecologists, giving voice to the needs and aspirations of ecologists, and the notion of inclusion that we heard about, and I think it's great to see that embodied in an award by the ESA. At the Umatilla Tribe, we have a first foods mission for our Department of Natural Resources, and that mission is based on a traditional serving order of foods that comes from tribal creation belief. And essentially what, very basically, the story is that when the Creator was preparing the world for the Indian people, he asked the animal people who's going to take care of the Indian people. And those foods made a promise to take care of the people. And so the serving order repeats the order of that promise. The salmon were the first to speak a promise to the people, followed by the deer, the roots, and the berries. And the water is served first, and traditional meals are always closed with a sip of water to emphasize the importance of water, because all of the other first foods and the people depend on water. And so as a former biologist and somebody with a strong interest in ecology, I saw in there a couple of other things, and that is, one, when you see that order played out, when we serve the foods like that, we're reminded of that promise those foods made. There's an implicit message that we have a reciprocal responsibility to take care of the foods that promise to take care of us. And I think that's a very powerful message. I think Western science and ecology for a long time lacked a good approach to putting people into ecology and relating people to the landscape and other creatures on it. And this first food serving order includes within it ecological relationships between and among the foods, and it codifies the relationship between people and the foods in our environment. So, when we go to harvest the foods certain times of the year in certain places, and we repeat that, and we follow that serving order, it is creating and maintaining our relationship with the environment. And I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to. We all value food. I think we all appreciate the power of food, the way we use it to bring people together, to share, to meet, to celebrate. And so I think, being able to communicate with the First Foods and show that we don't care about something in the abstract, like some water quality index or delisting the species or the existence value of species, but we care about these things because we do care about people. As a tribe, we need these foods, and we need them to be of sufficient abundance and quality to consume. And so many state and federal agencies share responsibilities for these resources, and using this serving order, I think, is a great way to find places where we can collaborate and ask ecological questions about how we can improve and restore these first foods. That message about reciprocity, again, I want to call attention to that because I think we need to think about how we can better manage that or measure that as managers. And so I would challenge you to think about that, please. I know we think about that at the Umatilla tribes. We work in many basins in northeastern Oregon and southeastern Washington restoring these foods. And so we put a great deal of effort into reciprocity, but I think there's more work to be done there. And I invite collaboration with our organization. I would like to thank staff at my Department of Natural Resources and our GIS program at the tribe for their great work, doing everything from early drought warning systems that are looking at groundwater, springs, surface flows, and first foods to look at early indicators of ecological drought. We have staff working on freshwater mussel ecology and a relationship with other native fish. We're looking at pollinators of women's foods, both roots and berries, and there's some exciting work there. Monitoring huckleberry to look at their response to climate variability and a change in climate environment. And we also do community excursions to promote the knowledge that we develop and our understanding of the landscape with tribal members so that they can go to lands where we have rights to access these foods and harvest and enjoy these first foods. Lastly, I would like to thank the community members who inspired my thinking on this mission: my father, Peter Quimps, Louis and Marie Dick, Steve and Rose So Happy, Rooney and Janie Pond, Lonnie Slam Jr. from Yakima, and Frank Buck from Peace Rapids. Many of these people are now deceased, but they all did and said things early in my life that made these first foods stick in my head. They made points, they asked questions, and reflecting on those later in life and combining that with both my education and my professional experience and training, was able to come up with this first foods approach in order to try to responsibly serve our community. But again, I do think it is something that can be used by other managers and ecologists outside of our tribe, and I invite collaboration in that regard. So thank you again. I really appreciate it, very humbling, and look forward to a great conference this week. And I would like to congratulate all the other award recipients that will be receiving awards during this conference. And thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much for your meaningful remarks and for the work that you do. I sincerely appreciate your efforts. Next, I'd like to introduce Astrid Caldas, who is ESA's Public Affairs Committee member and former Policy Section Chair, and Astrid will introduce tonight's opening plenary speaker. Astrid?
This is bright. Hi, everybody. It's so great to almost be able to see so many people here. This is crowded. Thank you so much for being here, not only the ecologists, but also all the other people who are interested in tonight's event. We are in for a treat this evening, folks. It is my great honor to introduce my ex-colleague, sometime collaborator, sometime mentor, sometime sounding board, and many-time work coach, the expert climate adaptation and communication practitioner, Dr. Suzanne Moser. Dr. Moses is director and principal researcher of Suzanne Moser Research and Consulting, based in Western Massachusetts. She is also a research faculty in the Environmental Studies Department of Antioch University, New England. Her broad work focuses on adaptation to climate change, especially in coastal areas, resilience, transformation, effective decision support, and science policy interaction, climate change communication and support of social changes, and psychosocial resilience in the face of the traumatic and transformative challenges associated with climate change. She is the founder of the Adaptive Mind Project, a capacity building and restorative training initiative to build the psychosocial skills needed for these times. She is a geographer by training and realizes the importance of social sciences to what we do. Dr. Moser is co-editor of a prize-winning book on successful adaptation for climate change and of a groundbreaking anthology on climate change communication titled Creating a Climate for Change, Communicating Climate Change and Facilitating Social Change. She made significant contributions to various IPCC assessment reports and special reports. She was a member of the Federal Advisory Committee on the third U.S. National Climate Assessment, co-led that committee's engagement and communication working group, and served as one of the convening lead authors on the assessment coastal chapter. She has served on scientific advisory boards for numerous organizations and is a fellow of the Aldo Leopold Leadership, Kavli Frontiers of Science, Donella Meadows Leadership, Google Science Communication, and Walton Sustainability Solutions Program. Whew. Now, one thing that you don't know about Susie, as I have the privilege of being allowed to call her, is that she is for sure one of the first people who have used AI to clone herself, so that she is everywhere. Seriously, in case you have not heard her name before, you should know that the likelihood of her being at a climate adaptation, resilience, or communication event is probably 100%. And that is accounting for statistical error. So, I'm glad that one of her clones is here today. Nah, this is the real thing. Tonight's talk is entitled Ecology for All, If We Want It, 3 Transformational Imperatives, which will be followed by a Q&A. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Suzanne Moser.
It's always something when a friend gives the introductions. Okay, this is not going to work. Let's do this. Thank you so much, Astrid, for that introduction. Is this working? Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. That's really kind, and thank you to ESA for the honor of inviting me. It's been actually 25 years since last I came to an ESA meeting, so it's exciting to be back. Now, one thing that you didn't hear in Astrid's introduction of me is any credentials in ecology, so you might wonder why in the world did ESA think to invite me to this? Well, there is a little bit of ecology in my background, but it's very well hidden under my geography degree, so you wouldn't know it. But my hunch is that ecology is not the part of the meeting theme that you invited me for. It's the for all part, given that I'm a card-carrying social scientist. So that's what I want to explore. And I guess the way I want to start this is to take for all seriously and make this a lot more democratic. You talk now. So I'm going to invite you for a moment to turn to your neighbor, and preferably to one that you know less than maybe the one on the other side. Introduce yourselves briefly, and for just 1 minute each, share with each other what ecology for all means to you. And I will acknowledge here that I've dropped ecologist from the theme, and I'll just simply say it's because that's not where it can stop. You cannot just be inclusive of all ecologists. You're going to have to probably make ecology much more broadly relevant to people beyond the discipline. So, but I'll stop there for a moment and just simply ask you, turn to each other and just share for a minute each what it means to you, ecology for all. Have at it. And can you bring up the slides? So if you haven't switched yet, please do. Make sure both of you get to talk. All right, just come to a close of what you're just sharing. Thank you for indulging me. I'm now going to invite us to get a sense of the room, of what you all said, and that's going to be not by Q&A, but can I ask the gentleman in the back to bring up Mentimeter, and all of you, I invite you to bring out your phones or anything, you know, iPad, whatever you have on you, and simply call up a browser and put in menti.com. After COVID, I don't have to explain very much anymore how to do this. I'm sure you all have done it. And there is a code to enter. It's 6602-3314. And it's going to ask you, once you have entered that code, to answer one question. And that is pretty difficult. That is to say, in one word, what is the essence for you of what you just shared? What does ecology for all mean to you in one word? Community, diversity, inclusivity, understanding, connection, interconnection. Oh, I love how this is working. Communication, equity, diversity, accessibility. The code, actually you can see it at the top, 6602-3314. Relationships, collaboration. All right, let's see if there's lots of you, so it's still moving. I'm gonna wait for a moment for it to settle down. And I'm happy to share this with ESA leadership so that you have it and know what all you members think. It seems to get pretty clearly around accessibility, community, diversity, communication, connection. Great, I can go home now. That's pretty much what I was going to say to you. Well, I'm going to try to add a little bit to it. So if you come back to the slides, this will stay open. So if you have not yet entered your words, please do add to it, and I'll share that. And I'll just say I'm happy to share my slides later too, and it's being recorded. So, okay, great. I'm going to move this forward. I want to say before I add my own 3 cents to how we do that, how we manifest this, I want to say one word about the why. And I'm not going to belabor this, because you all know it, but I'm going to say it to you in a way that maybe you haven't quite heard. I'm going to say it to you with a poem. Extinction crisis. In this world where every day uncounted friends, too many to name, furred, feathered, and free, offer themselves, their sounds and gestures, their gifts, known and unknown, their wild presence to our senses. In this world where every day 150 species stop singing, flying, swimming, hunting, mating, breathing, and blooming forever. In this world where beauty and blindness live side by side as staggering witnesses to our day-to-day lives, you need a fluid heart. You need to learn how to flow between ecstasy and grief, between love and the endangerment of love, so as to go on and do the one thing that needs to be done, to give life the one chance it wants for itself, to go on. Just doing science is probably not going to give life the one chance that it wants for itself. So I'm going to give you 3 angles on what it might take to realize ecology for all, so that there are more of us working toward the preservation of life, the chance for life on this planet. And this first one, you might say, well, yeah, I've been there, done that. I'm going to give it a little twist in a moment. But let me start here. We have to cross the boundaries of our discipline to reach those who have additional knowledge, other knowledge, and we have to go outside of academia. I'm delighted to see the policy prize that just went to Eric. That is one way to step outside the academy, but of course there are many others. Decision makers in all places of government and private sector need ecological knowledge. How do we do that? We got to cross boundaries to do that, span across, and that is disciplinary boundaries. It is gender boundaries, it is ethnic boundaries, it is hierarchies. All kinds of boundaries need to be crossed. And that gets us to a place where everything we know and that we're familiar with and feel comfortable in ends, and where something unfamiliar, possibly unknown, begins. We're going to have to move out of our comfort zone. It takes leadership to do that. Very often, leadership sort of stops at the place of the familiar, right? I am a leader of my project, of my university, of my discipline, but the true leadership that is needed to make ecology one for all is to step beyond those boundaries. And why bother? Well, that is that larger common purpose, the preservation of life in the biggest sense. But more specifically, I'm going to draw on another poet here, Marge Piercy. You probably know her poem called To Be of Use. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there is this beautiful line in it that you see there. Greek amphoras for wine and oil, like the one pictured there, Hopi vases that held corn, are put in museums. Think about it as the article that you just published that ends up in a scientific journal. That's a museum of sort. But you know these amphoras, these vases, were made to be used. And we all want to be used in this way. We want to contribute. I say we, assuming, but knowing the ones of you that I know, I think I'm not making too much of an assumption. What do we know about science that is useful? You see here some of the attributions that people usually make when they think science is worth something for their decision making. It has to be salient, it has to be relevant to what they do. It also has to be credible, and it has to be legitimate. And what I mean by that is that all the relevant voices have been heard in creating the knowledge and our assessments and, useful science. It also has to make the life of a decision maker easier. If it doesn't do that, think about that for yourself. If you get a new tool or a new something, you're only going to go through the trouble of learning it and trying to, make this tool your own if it actually makes your life easier. If not, think about getting a new phone or, any of those things, right? There's always that learning curve, and people are busy. So unless it makes their life easier, why bother? The other one is, and that goes right with it, is because things change rapidly now, can it be updated frequently? So these 5 criteria, we know, make science more likely to be used. Now, I've done quite a bit of work in asking decision makers, what do you want from scientists? And it tends to fall into 4 categories. The first one is the situation when a decision maker knows what he or she needs. They know, basically, I want to do X, but I don't have the right information. This is when you can be responsive to a very clear, specified need. That's super helpful. The second one is similar in that a decision maker knows what they want to do, and they have the answer, if you will, that maybe that is a step after you've been responsive. So now they know, they have the right information, they want to move forward, but they don't yet have the political will gathered. They don't have the public support yet. And they need someone who's credible to go out there and say, can you help us basically raise the public support for this, the political support for this? It could be training people. It could be educating the public. Those are super helpful ways to be helpful to a decision maker. A third one is a slightly different situation. In this case, the decision maker does not yet know, what should I do? Is there a way to manage a changing system in a new way? This is where you can actually get inventive, innovative, come up with a new idea, a new solution, a new tool. Very helpful to be generative in that way. And the last one is, it could also be the situation when someone doesn't know yet what to do, or they've been doing something for a long time, but it's not working. And someone outside a decision-making body needs to say, it's not working. So to be critical and possibly combine that with being generative, saying here's another way of doing that, that's incredibly important from a political point of view. So those are the 4 ways. And many of you, I've seen it in the program, you do this kind of work all the time. We have learned a lot of lessons about how to do this work well. If you haven't, or if you need extra ideas, I just simply want to point you to a sample of the many toolkits that we have developed of how scientists can work more effectively across disciplines and across academia to reach decision makers, stakeholders, partners, societal partners. I give you different ones. The first one, because I know this is an international crowd, the first one comes out of Australia. The second one I put up here, University of Michigan, is where the National Estrogen Research Reserve System Science Collaborative is housed. They just came out with a toolkit not long ago on how to do collaborative science. There is something in Europe, TDNet Toolbox, that you might be interested in. The TD stands for transdisciplinarity. You can easily access that. A program that is actually just now closing, but has trained probably many of you in the room the Earth Leadership Program, formerly known as the Leopold Leadership Program, that has actually developed a whole bunch of collaborative tools that are very helpful. And then there's something that's not coming out of academia per se, but that I find incredibly helpful for creative ways of engaging non-academics in the work that we do, called Liberating Structures. So I highly recommend any of these. But what have we learned from this? What we have learned is that there's quite an attitude shift involved in making this work. It moves us from being pretty certain we got it figured to being curious about what do other people know that is relevant to the questions. And that is quite often coming down from our horse and becoming much more humble about what it all takes to make change happen in the world. As ecologists, we're not trained in how to do decision-making, how to do policy, right? We are not trained in the concerns that move people to engage with us or not. So rather than understanding just ecological change, what we often don't know is how to make social change happen. And that is where we simply need to be much more humble. And it goes with it that we're no longer just the only expert in the room. We have to draw on the expertise of everyone, even if they do not have a PhD, right? I love this quote from Hannah Arendt, philosopher, who said, when you come with that kind of an enlarged mentality, it means that one trains one's imagination to go visiting. Think about that for a moment. When you step outside of your discipline, outside of academia, you go visiting someone else. This philosopher, French philosopher Desprez, thought that that was a virtue of politeness. And she had a number of other virtues along those lines. Think about that as you sort of consider what does it mean to connect with someone outside your own area of expertise. To find others interesting. Oh my God, what an idea. To ask questions that are interesting to the other person, not just to you. To think with, to become attuned to what their concerns are, what their expertises are, and to become deeply, deeply curious. To develop this ability to sense and to respond to what is emerging in that moment. So you have to move away from your script, in other words, right? It is something about just being very present, very attentive to other people's concerns, and to actually make it possible to meet a true encounter. And that means you're not the only one who has capabilities, you're helping others come into their full capabilities and to expand the possibilities of knowing and acting together. What I find really maybe most disturbing about this is this risky openness of letting those one meets shape what occurs. I love that phrase. Let other people be in charge. Very difficult when you just got a grant that says, here, do this with the money that you just got from NSF or from whatever source you might have gotten it. To be open to that. Think about what that would mean for this particular theme, for this conference, if you were polite with each other in this particular way. Now here comes the kick to this, or the trouble with this. This kind of encounter, this kind of meeting others on their terms, not just on your own, typically takes time. In the meantime, outside, we have an accelerating climate change, accelerating biodiversity loss, and what is it now, 9 planetary boundaries that have been crossed? So at the very same time that change is accelerating and we need faster and faster answers, we're moving outside the way, the realm of what we know, how it works. so we need more time to understand it. Plus, we need time to engage with people. Now, what does that lead to? It leads to a risk, a growing risk, that our science is becoming irrelevant because we're busy studying stuff in the field or in the lab while things are just moving outside the thresholds, outside the bounds of the known. It also leads to the sort of medieval situation again, where our science or our decisions get made without any scientific input. I mean, that was what the Enlightenment was all about, right? Here, do this in a far better informed way. So I'm asking you to do this difficult work of connecting with others, take the time to get to know them, and outside is this situation. How do we do that? What we've learned over how to do science together with others is, as I said, if you want the science to be considered in decision-making, it has to be seen as salient, as relevant, as credible, as legitimate by the people who make the decisions. And that increases, or the usability of the science increases when, as I said before, when you build a shared understanding of what is the decision context, how can we tailor this information, when do you need the information? You know, if I come with my information to you 2 weeks after you made a decision, too bad, right? So it has to be developed in a timely fashion, and it has to, as I said before, make life easier and more effective and efficient for the decision maker. Okay, so great, but what actually increases the actual use of this information? That is a relational question. At this point, what we know from the science, from people who study science-practice interaction is the more scientists interact with practitioners, the more the users of the information build their own knowledge and skills, and they understand the risk and benefit of using this new information or this new tool, and the more they trust the scientist, the more likely they are to actually use whatever you offer them. And that trust building takes time. This is the one thing we don't have, but that's what it takes. I'll give it to you in the words of Wendell Berry, who in this context actually was speaking to young people, but I think it actually is true for all people. This is the dreadful situation that people are in. I think of them and I say, well, the situation you're in now is a situation that's going to call for a lot of patience. And to be patient in an emergency is a terrible trial. You probably all have heard this African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I'm asking you, how can we go faster? There are multiple places where we can make progress. One is in the science. How can we speed up what we do? And of course, there are ways to speed up on the decision-making side too. We don't have to do this by ourselves, and there's a lot of ways we can speed up the interaction between the two. Let's go one at a time. On the science side, there are things we can do like better monitoring to detect problems more quickly. We might use rapid assessment methodologies, or now the emerging technology of AI and all the related tools to that. Partnerships, collaborations, of course. It takes an initial time investment, but once you have them, things go actually a lot faster. So to go slow to go fast is a good recipe. What if you had decision makers embedded in your academic environments? You know, think of it as sister exchanges or internships, externships. In this case, having the decision makers right with you at all times. It also means training people to do this kind of work and not to start, every time from scratch, but it should be part of everyday graduate education to learn how to do this interaction well. On the decision-making side, there are many things we can do as well. Reducing red tape, integrating permitting, streamlining decision-making processes, removing funding barriers. It's actually a really big issue. Everybody has their siloed finances, and it makes it very difficult to talk to each other. So having standing cross-agency, cross-sector, cross-scale collaborations is a really important piece. Again, the capacity building and understanding the science is really important. And just in the reverse order, embedding scientists or graduate students in decision-making helps that transfer a lot more. And we can do a lot more in connecting the two, right? Every time you as a scientist have to do the work by yourself to start with a new decision maker to build those relationships, it's a time sink. What if we had standing boundary individuals or organizations whose job was to make that connection at all times and help with that, become expert in making that connection? So it might just simply be someone else besides you with all the obligations you have in a university environment, that someone else is responsible for making that connection work. That can actually accelerate interactions and actively managing that interaction, whether it's the boundary organization helping with what's most important. They need to hear that from both sides, right? Or actually providing active help, providing training to both sides in how to work with each other. So there are many things we can do to help accelerate in each of these places. But what if we have to go fast and far with each other, given the endangerment of life that I talked about earlier? I had a chance to interview a marine biologist in northern Alaska a couple years back, Gay Sheffield. She's with the Alaska Sea Grant Extension Service, and she said to me, I really will never forget, and it got me thinking about how to address this issue of going far and fast together. Climate change doesn't even capture what's happening here. We're dealing with systems collapsing, a complete shift. It's impacting everything, culturally, ecologically, and economically. And if you know anything, of course, of what's happening in the Arctic, they're basically just ahead of us in terms of seeing bigger, faster impacts, but that's just basically the precursor to what the rest of us in other places will experience. System collapse. How do we deal with that? Is science still relevant in system collapse? What kind of help do decision makers need in that moment, in that crisis moment? Well, I was trying to look for a model. Do we have anything? Is there anything out there that gives us an idea of how to organize ourselves for going far and fast together? If I could see you, I would probably ask you to shout it out if you have any ideas, but I can't see you very well, so I'm going to just give you my model and see how that resonates with you. You all know this one really well. That's an arrangement of how to go far fast. If every one of these birds flew on their own or in one straight line, they wouldn't be able to fly as far and as fast as they do. But they've figured out a particular way to arrange themselves. How does this translate to how we might work with each other? Well, consider this. What if at the front was not a scientist at all, but someone who coaches a decision maker? And behind that person is someone who's a generalist, an integration expert, someone who's also really good at communication. And behind that is someone who can facilitate and translate, maybe between traditional ecological knowledge and scientific knowledge. And behind them start to come the scientists, use-inspired researchers, research synthesizers, these boundary organizations I was talking about, people who actually understand decision-making, people who know how to manage all that diverse knowledge that's out there that is so hard to now figure our way through. Maybe artificial intelligence helps us with that. Beyond that is maybe people who are into big data science and applied researchers who really are working out particular problems and learn from that. And some basic research as well, innovation research on the methodological side, the social side, the ecological side, technologies, whatever. Open science, making it accessible. We need those people in the back. We need science education, fundamental research, science advocates in a time when people no longer trust science as much as, we hoped. And of course, all the societies and professional societies and funders behind that. So it's an arrangement that we need. And not just everyone, okay, fine, you can just keep going with whatever you want, but people actually communicating with each other and collaborating so that one thing supports the ducks in the front, if you will. And that brings me to another angle on ecology for all. If we want to integrate across all these ways of knowing these different expertises and want to draw on the people who are actually affected by these, how do we do that? It's a question of how to center equity in ecology and in our engagement with everyone. We know we're working on this, and still, this is a truly huge challenge still before us. It takes us, in my mind, to really looking at decision systems and what's behind them, and really understand what keeps things the way they are. And when I say things or systems, I mean, for example, why are we still not having, equal representation of people of color in universities in our disciplines? Why do we not have adequate representation and voices of people of color in decision-making bodies or in this society? So, take any system. At the level that we just talked about so far, we've just been thinking about policies, practices, resource flows. That's sort of the layer of which you might engage. But why are those decisions made? Why are policies what they are? Who gets the money? Who makes those choices? Well, that takes us to that level there in the middle. It takes us to who sits at the table, what are their relationships, and what are the power dynamics among them. And behind that really is the question of why are just those people there? That's a lot to do with our mindset. That's the deepest taboo behind why things are the way they are. So I want to focus on that middle layer for a moment and think about how do we increase who is in the circle of engagement, who sits at the table, who is involved in our research projects and in the decisions. And at a minimum, here's what I've learned, what is required to do that. To make our science more accessible and make our engagement opportunities more accessible, we have to really think about who has access to the information. COVID was a great example, right? When the students in poor rural communities or in poor urban neighborhoods, they didn't have the internet access that the ones in the suburbs or in the better well-off, families and households had. It's a huge implication for their implication. They lost 3 years, essentially, right? And the same is true for if we put our information in places that people can't see it, it's not helpful to them. So every time you publish something, every time you put something out there, who is it for and can it be reached by everyone who needs it? The ability to attend meetings. We have these meetings in the middle of the day. Well, the people we want to reach are at work. They have 3 jobs. They can't easily come. And at night, when you ask them to come, or on the weekends you ask them to come, well, somebody's got to get them there. Somebody's got to provide the childcare for that to happen, right? So we have to think even in our funding proposals, are we enabling the people we want to engage in the way we work? Those who have challenges, be that physical or other handicaps or access challenges, how are we accommodating those? Sometimes it's not a handicap of any sort. It's just simply discomfort with engaging in a public process when you don't know what's going to happen. So there might be trainings before you can actually start the actual work with people that are necessary. We heard this beautiful opening with First Foods. It's a great example of how important cultural ways are for many people, acknowledging land, customs, culture, history. In every part of the world, really, that's different. So, making space for that, not starting with a detailed agenda without that, I think is a really important way to make our spaces more inclusive and welcoming, creating a sense of belonging to whatever process is going on. Epistemic justice, that just simply means acknowledging that the scientific way of knowing is not the only way of knowing the world. We know this now, but what does this actually mean in reality? How do we do that? Those are the kinds of questions we have to deal with a lot more. Making sure that whatever you are hoping to achieve with your engagement is actually commensurate with the way you engage. If you want deep engagement, don't ask people to just fill out a survey and go home. It has to align. You have to create the kinds of interactive, creative, collaborative spaces, and the toolkits that I offered you earlier are a good example of where you can find ways of doing that. And then the last bit I want to say, and that's simply my own choice, and I hope many of you feel that way in the same way, that is that with every choice we make, with every part of our work, we're now aspiring, as white privileged people in particular, to make our work be anti-racist, to really rectify what has been wronged for so long. So that's the minimum. There are many more things to say about this, and I guess I want to say one word here in particular about communication. In most of the training that we get, our approach to this is we got to get the facts right, we got to get the right message, and find the right language, the right words, somewhere with the intent that maybe we just persuade people, we just talk them down, we reduce their resistance to whatever change needs to happen, they acquiesce or they accept what needs to happen, and by some miracle they'll do the right thing. That's the old persuasion model, right? And typically it's driven by what we used to call the information deficit model. You must not know what I know, so therefore let me tell you, and then somehow the right thing will happen. That's really outdated now. What we need instead is what I might call the transformational knowledge, a model of science communication. And it begins with shutting up. It begins with listening, with curiosity, as I said, with visiting, with dialogue and seeking understanding, not depositing my knowledge on another, but to understand what everyone knows. There might be a place for your expertise to come in the same way that everyone else's comes in, but it's not the first and primary thing. And the whole point of it is to build trust, empathy, and respect for each other, and realizing that what you're really after here is assisting people, supporting people, and enabling people to make really hard choices. If you were asked to move away from the places where you used to live, to change your livelihoods, to move away from everything you've ever known, maybe your familiar neighborhood or whatever, imagine how difficult that would be. That's what we're asking many people to do now. They can't stay in wild and urban interfaces or on the coastal edge. Those are big, big shifts people need to make. And we need to create spaces in which people reckon with that reality and have time to really wrap their heads around what that means and understand what are my options, what are the possibilities for me in another place with another kind of work. Those are opportunities to actually deeply heal, to look at how did we get here? What's the history? How come people are in these places? How have we made that so? And, I'm not saying communication alone will fix that. You need deep other structural changes and financial support and whatnot to help people make these deep changes. But this kind of communication, this dialogic approach, this relational approach, is what will actually enable people to eventually take those choices. All along the way, they will need to tell themselves a new story about their lives. Why would it make sense to change so profoundly? That's what we're in now. So we're moving from just providing information to connecting with other people's knowledge, from talking at or even to people to bringing people to the table and finding, not just a new language, but framing it in a way that makes sense to the people we're talking to. And that means basically moving away from just the message approach to communication to building relationships. It also means that we are, in many ways, creating these possibilities for a true encounter, for enabling other people to take over. It's so uncomfortable, right? For other people to not just co-produce, but possibly to co-lead what we're doing. So, in my mind, transformative attitudes and actually skills in making that happen. I will also say, much of that almost sounds like technique, but I think it is much deeper than that. In the social sciences, the lingo for this is to decolonize what we do. And I think that might be a good way to describe it, but I think the way I would break that down for you is to look around, to say who's here and who isn't. How are we doing our science? How come we're doing our science in this particular way? What do we work on? What do we not work on? What counts as important? And what ends is that science used? We have legacies of truly challenging and destructive ways of interacting with others, with the land. And so, this is the time, in my mind, that we really begin to grapple, late as it is, but that we grapple with those challenges. A few things that I've learned: it's not an add-on. This is the heart of the work now, because this is where we are in history. We have gotten here to both the destruction of human life and the destruction of non-human life by way of being in this colonial way with our activities, with our science, with our technology on the planet. So to change that, we have to truly make that the center of our work. It is deeply about trust building, beginning, middle, and end, the whole way through, that we maybe get to new healing relationships, restorative relationships with people. The chance to get that right is really much bigger when we actually do it together with others, when we don't think we're in charge. And I don't want to minimize that. We throw these words around now. It's actually really hard to hand that over when we have accountabilities to more than one place, the funder, our universities, our students, you name it, but also to the world. Much of that work, certainly for myself, has felt like a matter of unlearning what I thought was the way to do science, the way to communicate. It's been getting away from that and learning to do this in a new way. And that, again, takes time. A terrible trial, but a necessary one. I find it personally, it has profoundly challenged who I see myself to be and what I see my work in the world to be. So I simply want to encourage you and take it all the way down to that personal level. Okay, I'm turning to that third layer then, which is to recognize that this deep work that we all must do is not a side job. It is part of our work, and we now labor in what you might call the ruins. So the last layer for all is that we need to include ourselves, something we tend to forget. This challenge of working in the ruins, whether that's the biodiversity crisis or whether that's climate change or the challenges of racism, you name it, COVID, any of those, the multiple crises happening at once, confronts us now with a situation that is characterized in the way I think about it as It's constant change, chaotic, complex, lots of uncertainty. There's a lot of trauma. Every disaster that happens is now, an opportunity for people to be traumatized. And it is transformative, either by our choosing, or if we refuse to change, it'll come to us regardless. How do we now approach our work in that space? You've probably seen this quote many times. Camille Parmesan has said it, of how hard that work is for her personally. You see the quote, "I don't know of a single scientist that's not having an emotional reaction to what is being lost. It's gotten to be so depressing that I'm not sure I'm going back to this particular site again, because I just know I'm going to see more and more of it dead and bleached and covered with brown algae." And you've seen other expressions of this. It's now in the news. It is being talked about in scientific journals. This is a project called "Is This How You Feel?" Well-known scientists use names you might recognize, writing what it is like to do work and what do the implications of that science mean to them personally. You've seen the news about protests where scientists simply say enough is enough. And I was delighted to see that you will have a session of that sort here even at the ESA meeting. But also the people we work with, people who work in extension, in outreach, in engagement. Here is a quote from an extension specialist who works in Charleston, South Carolina, and she said, "I'm giving 3 talks in the next week on climate change and sea level rise, given recent flooding. I guarantee I will be talking to a lot of people already highly anxious and worried. I'm afraid that no matter how carefully I craft these talks, I'm going to have people going to that traumatized space." We have not learned how to do trauma-informed communication. That is now the work, right? Or this is an example. I'm not going to play it, but I invite you to it. I was in a video called "Once You Know." It's a documentary, and in it I was quoted as saying, "I live in a day-to-day practical denial of climate change because it is unbearable. To know what I know is unbearable." Probably each one of you has had similar experiences. Now, there's growing recognition for this kind of emotional labor. I just put one paper here, but that's now growing. What is not being done is train us for it. You don't learn that in planning school or in ecology or in engineering or in physics. How do you deal with constant traumatic and transformative change on that level, on that deeper level? Well, it's been a challenge that I've gotten really interested in about 2015. Since 2015, I've been thinking about this and decided that this is the work that I do want to do now, which is to build the skills, the psychosocial skills of people like you see listed here: scientists, advocates, planners, elected officials, youth, educators, psychologists, spiritual leaders, in being better prepared for the psychosocial demands of our time. The complexity of all of those things that I mentioned, from climate change, biodiversity, and racism, and all the rest of it. What do they need? I call it the Adaptive Mind Project, and it is essentially a capacity building initiative to help deal with these types of change and the challenges that come. And I will simply acknowledge at this moment that for those of us who are white and privileged, this is very different work than for people of color, people who have not been privileged for generations, to come to this moment in time, to this kairos, right? For us, it might be, oh, it's been so comfortable until now, and now it's not anymore. And now all of a sudden we have to deal with this. For other people, it's been uncomfortable for a very, very long time. And that transformative change might be one that people really want to see. Now, I'm not going to tell you that whatever we're trying to develop with the Adaptive Mind Project is like, we're turning into mini therapists. It's not what's happening. We're trying to be capacity building, if you will, before it gets to the point where people are in crisis and need clinical help. We're not becoming mini therapists. But We're trying to create skills and capacities and propensities for people to not need it. Because we already have a crisis in providing mental health services. We're not going to have enough therapists to deal with everyone who is distressed from climate change and all the intersecting things. What do I mean by this? Let me just say it out loud, and it is an evolving definition just because we're still in the early stages of developing it. But here's what we've learned. It is a set of propensities, practices, and capacities that can be cultivated. It's not like you have it, you don't. These can actually be cultivated. And they're held by individuals, but not only. One of the typical white things to do is to think that it's another individual thing I have to do. No, this is something we actually do with each other and support each other in our networks. And the work is to prevent, to minimize, respond with agility, creativity, resolve, stamina, skillfulness, resilience, hope, and humility to these shocks and stresses that I outlined that come with constant traumatic and transformative change. Now, the focus, when I say adaptive mind, you might think, well, it's just all what's in our head, our mindsets. But what we learned so far is that it very quickly connects actually with the feelings people hold and the fact that they don't have a space to take them. Feelings are held in the body, so we have to address both of those. And very quickly, people are interested in the big existential questions of what makes sense then? In light of what I know about the dreadful possibilities that are already happening and that are even more unfolding in the future, what is the deepest source from which I can come and what will sustain me going forward? And we do that as individuals in community. And so our focus is fully aware of all the other forces out there that shape that future. Our focus is on the individual embedded in social networks. We draw on many different frameworks, if you will, that already exist: nature and earth-based wisdom, all kinds of psychologies, lots of anti-racist restorative justice work, but also systems thinking and relational work from many different disciplines. And I will, again, emphasize, this is not something that is just here to, go and meditate or, take care of yourself. This is relational work. This is community care work that is needed. What are the skills? Well, what we're discovering, and this is very much a bottom-up driven, what people tell us what they need, but it's also top-down from people who have studied these sorts of things across many different disciplines. What we've come to is a set of adaptive mind skills that I organize sort of around head, heart, hands, and as you see, the transpersonal is another category. And I distinguish there also head and mouth, because it's not just how we think about things, but also these communication skills, the negotiation skills, the conflict resolution skills that people need. It is recognizing that people have intense feelings about the future and need a place to clarify them, share them with others, and again ground themselves in the body. It's very trauma-informed work. It's very much a body-oriented, somatic type of work that we do. And it doesn't stop there. It is not just to cope better with what is. It is to enable people to go out into the world and be more effective, walking their talk and engaging in the affairs of the world. And as we were beginning to discover, people really ask for that transpersonal anchor, if you will. That the one held deeply inside, what am I here for? But also, whatever version of spirituality people hold. We're not telling anybody what that is, but to simply give space for that. And that seems to be what people need most across all these. So let me come to a closing then. What does ecology for all mean to me? Well, I've given you a lot of ways in which, this is much more about connecting with others. It is connecting with people across the academy, across the ivory tower in society, with people that have been underserved and not included for many, many generations. And last but not least, to bring ourselves fully to this work. And so ecology for all actually means to me ecology with all. Thank you very much. Let me quickly do a time check. Do we have a little bit of time still for questions? We're close to the end of this, but what do you think? A couple questions? Okay, so there are microphones in parts. Oh, anyway, I can't see you, but hopefully you can see. Oh, there is one. Please, ask your question.
Thank you for the thoughtful and interesting guidance. So I'm Clarence Lehman from the University of Minnesota. Here's, this is something with attitude, but it's actually a very simple, practical thing. And so when I now meet with legislators, locally or nationally, I will sometimes start it like this. I will say, we are here for you to lobby us. Lobby us on what the people you represent need, and then we can work that into our project. So that really sometimes startles the legislators to be asked to lobby us. Just a little point, a practical point from attitude and then use.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I have my own version of that, which is that, you know, I encourage people to never ask others to say, what do you need from me? Because you get the Christmas wish list. Instead, I say, you know, I come with a gift and then simply listen and see what is it that they do. Once you understand what people do and how they use information in that process, then you have a place to hook your information into and see what if that already exists, maybe in another discipline, maybe in your own, but you can go from there to then, you know, make the connection back to your research and what the relevant questions are. I see somebody else standing up there, so please. And is there one over here? Yep, okay, I'll come to you in a moment.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm in early career stage right now. I'm a graduate student, and I want to know how I can do trauma-informed community work. I want to help communities preserve the natural spaces around them in the ways that are relevant and accessible amidst the climate crisis. But I find it difficult to marry the way that I've been taught to engage with communities in the sense of you need to create this sense of urgency and tension and be engaging with them to sit and talk about or listen to it talk about an issue. But that is very traumatic for a lot of communities. And if you're in that practical denial that you need to just keep going every day, how do I ask you to sit and think and strategize about something that is terrorizing you, that, you know, this conversation will not yield a tangible answer for you in the next week, you know?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Our very direct approach in trying to get right to the point is actually often the very thing that we shouldn't do, which is one more reason why all this takes so much time. But there are places to learn, you know, how to do trauma-informed work and sort of how to approach that, how to, one of the most important things that happens in trauma is that people don't have control. So how to create circumstances where people get to control the conversation and how fast they get to those conversations, that's an important first step. So I guess the easiest and quickest thing I can maybe point you to, besides, you know, Dr. Google, for a lot of good trauma work out there, is the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America, which is therapists learning to become climate aware and bring their skill in trauma work to that. There is a Trauma Research Foundation that offers many, many trainings. So there are different places to get started. But anyway, that would be my recommendation to start there. thank you for that comment. That's really important. Yes?
Hi there. Hi. My name is Greg Spooner. I'm with Scientists Rebellion, and I was thinking about your slide with all the ducks. And I wonder if I missed a duck, if there might have been a climate activist or anti-racist activist duck flying up there. Thank you.
Thank you for that one, Greg. There wasn't one on there, so you didn't miss it. This was in the context of science and policy interaction. And I would say that the activist community often creates a kind of a space in which people are forced to work with each other, and that can be very helpful. So maybe it's one of those ducks that are like flying around that particular triangle to corral people into that particular formation. I haven't thought about, and I'll just take that home with me, of how to, if there is a place for an activist duck in that particular V. So haven't thought about it, but I'll give it a shot.
Thank you. I'll keep flying around.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? There's one more. Okay, go for it.
Hi, my name's Anna. I had a question about, as a very early career ecologist, I feel like I face this sort of conflict of trying to establish legitimacy as a researcher, but also address these concerns and really integrate them in my work from the start. Do you have any advice about navigating that?
Yeah, good one. And this is the challenge of working in institutions that may or may not yet be ready to make the shift to a more open approach to science and use-relevant science. But there are many universities that actually have made that transition, and where you learn how to do this kind of work, and that is part of the credential, and it gets rewarded, right? So it is much more difficult to do that in contexts in universities or in departments that have not yet recognized the importance of making this kind of connection. So maybe we should talk about where you're studying and where to go from there. Thank you so much. All right, with that, I think I'm handing it back to you. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful opening plenary. So we are officially kicked off now. I want to invite everybody to come downstairs to the exhibit hall for the reception, and we hope to see you back here at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Let's go.